Our life then was a blueprint, sketched out in the giddy, incandescent ink of new love. When Sophia and I got married, the world felt like an unbuilt house, and we were its architects, holding the plans to a future filled with sunlight and open spaces. We were young, our hearts full of a defiant optimism that saw every obstacle as a mere stepping stone. But blueprints are just paper, and the foundations of a dream require more than hope to set. They require capital. Financial pressure, that slow, insidious vine, began to creep into the corners of our idyllic life almost immediately. It started with small things, a whispered argument over a credit card bill, a strained silence when the car needed repairs. I had a steady job, a respectable one in logistics, but the numbers on my paycheck never seemed to stretch far enough to cover the life we had so eagerly designed. The sunlight in our blueprint began to feel filtered, the open spaces smaller. That's when Robert stepped in, appearing like a deus ex machina in the third act of a struggling play. Robert was a fixture from Sophia's childhood, a family friend who had watched her grow up. He was older, established, a man who wore success as comfortably as he wore his tailored suits. He possessed a certain gravitational pull, an effortless charisma that made you want to believe every word he said. When he offered Sophia a position at his marketing firm, it felt less like a job offer and more like salvation. "It's the least I can do," he'd said over dinner at our small, cluttered apartment, his voice a smooth baritone that filled the room. He held his wine glass with an air of practiced ease, a gesture that made our own mismatched glasses seem clumsy. "You two are practically family. And Sophia," he'd added, turning his gaze on her, a warm, avuncular smile playing on his lips, "is far too talented to be sitting idle." I was overcome with gratitude. My admiration for him swelled, uncritical and absolute. Here was a man of means, with no obligation to us, extending a hand simply because he could. He framed it as a favor, a benevolent act for our benefit, and for a while, I believed him with every fiber of my being. I thanked him profusely, my words stumbling over each other in my earnestness. I saw him as our benefactor, our guardian angel in a bespoke suit, and I couldn't imagine how fortunate we were to have someone like him in our corner. Sophia's excitement was a palpable thing, a current of energy that revitalized our home. It wasn't just about the money, though the relief of a second income was immense. For her, it was about purpose, about independence. It was a chance to step out from the shadow of our shared financial anxieties and carve out a space that was entirely her own. She dove into her work with a fierce enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. She came home late, her eyes tired but bright, her conversation buzzing with the lexicon of her new world. Client briefs, campaign metrics, strategic synergy. The stories she told were often centered on Robert, the demanding boss. "He's tough, but he's fair," she would say, shrugging off her exhaustion as she kicked off her new, more expensive shoes. "He just expects everyone to give their absolute best." I didn't mind the long hours. I saw them as a necessary investment, the dues one pays when starting a new, promising career. I told myself this was the adjustment period, the time she needed to learn the ropes, to prove herself worthy of the opportunity Robert had given her. I became her cheerleader, her steadfast supporter from the sidelines. "You're doing great," I'd say, rubbing her shoulders as she hunched over her laptop late at night. "Robert wouldn't push you so hard if he didn't see your potential. But time has a way of stretching things. Patience, trust, the fabric of a marriage." The late nights didn't recede, they became the norm. The adjustment period bled into a permanent state of being. Sophia seemed constantly preoccupied, her attention tethered to the small, glowing screen of her phone. It became a third presence in our marriage, an unwelcome guest at the dinner table, a silent companion in our bed. "Work never really stops," she'd murmur with a tired, apologetic smile when I'd ask why she had to respond to an email at 10 o'clock at night. Then came the other changes, subtle shifts in the landscape of our life that I couldn't quite map. She started dressing differently. The soft, comfortable clothes she once favored were replaced by sharp, polished blouses and tailored trousers. Her hair was always perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate. I told myself it was simply the uniform of the corporate world, a necessary part of her new identity. Her conversations began to orbit more and more around Robert, though never in a way that set off alarm bells. It was always in the context of work, of his relentless perfectionism. "He's such a micromanager," she'd say, shaking her head in feigned exasperation. "He wants to sign off on every little detail." I saw it as the complaint of a dedicated employee, not the confession of something more. Occasionally, a pang of unease would flutter in my chest, a cold, brief premonition. It would happen when she mentioned how much time they spent alone in meetings, brainstorming late into the evening after everyone else had gone home. But I would quickly brush it aside. Robert was a family friend, a man we trusted implicitly. Sophia was my wife, the woman I had built my life with. Doubt felt like a betrayal in itself, a stain on the very love I held so dear. Looking back now, I see my naivety not as a virtue, but as a blindness, a willful refusal to see the cracks forming beneath the glossy surface of our lives. There were moments, clear as day in hindsight, that should have been red flags. The time we hosted Robert for dinner, and he raised his glass in a toast, his eyes fixed on Sophia. "You're a lucky man, David," he had said, his voice laced with an emotion I couldn't place. "Sophia is one of a kind." It was a harmless compliment, or so I forced myself to believe. During that same dinner, his attentiveness to her was almost suffocating. He asked about her workload, her stress levels, whether she was getting enough support from her team. At the time, I saw it as the concern of a good boss, a mentor. Now, I see it for what it was, the possessive inquiry of a man staking his claim. Sophia, for her part, was a master of reassurance. She never gave me any overt reason to suspect. She was still affectionate, still supportive, even as her work consumed her. Whenever I voiced my concerns, she would laugh, a light, dismissive sound, and pull me close. "You're worrying too much," she'd say, kissing my cheek. "Robert's tough, but it's just work. Nothing else." I believed her because I wanted to. I believed her because the alternative was a chasm too terrifying to contemplate. I trusted Robert because he wore the mask of a friend. I trusted Sophia because she wore the face of my wife. And in that blind, desperate trust, I ignored the tremors shaking the very foundation of our lives. I had no idea what was happening in the shadowed hours of those late nights, behind the sterile facade of work stress and the constant glow of her phone. I had no idea that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to lose everything. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the change in air pressure before a storm. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was projecting my own anxieties onto the normal ebbs and flows of a marriage strained by a demanding new job. But as weeks bled into months, the distance between Sophia and me became a palpable presence, a cold space in the bed, a silence that swallowed our conversations. She wasn't confrontational or angry. It was a quieter, more insidious kind of withdrawal, the feeling of holding sand in your hands and watching it slip through your fingers, grain by grain. The late-night talks that had once been our sanctuary, filled with laughter and plans for the future, dwindled into brief, functional exchanges. Her answers became clipped, her gaze distant, always seeming to be focused on something just over my shoulder. "I'm just tired, David," she'd say, her voice flat, when I'd ask if something was wrong. "Work's been nonstop. Robert's been pushing the team harder than ever. He's got these insane deadlines, and I just don't want to let him down." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe that the only rival for her attention was a spreadsheet, the only other man in her life a demanding, but ultimately harmless boss. But a knot of suspicion was tightening in my gut. The late nights at the office became a nightly ritual. A text would arrive around 7 or 8. Asterisk, "Don't wait up for me. I'll grab something at work." Asterisk, at first, I accepted it. Corporate culture could be brutal, and Sophia had always been driven. But there was a new evasiveness in her eyes when she finally came home, a way she'd avoid my gaze as she recounted a sanitized version of her day. It made my chest ache. One evening, fueled by a desperate mix of loneliness and concern, I decided to surprise her. I stopped by a cafe and picked up her favorite latte, thinking a small gesture, a brief visit, might bridge the gap that had opened between us. When I arrived at her office building, however, the floor was dark and silent. Her desk was neat, her chair pushed in. A cleaner, mopping the floors with a weary rhythm, told me everyone on that floor had left hours ago. When she walked through our front door close to midnight, I asked her about it, trying to keep my tone casual. "Oh," she said, not missing a beat. We wrapped up early, and a few of us went out for a team dinner to de-stress. I'm so sorry, I should have texted. Her explanation was so plausible, her delivery so flawless, that I felt a wave of guilt for my suspicion. And yet, the seed had been planted. It was taking root in the dark, fertile ground of my doubt. Then there was Robert. His charm, which I had once found so impressive, now began to grate on me. It felt predatory, possessive. At a family barbecue we hosted, he draped an arm casually over Sophia's shoulder. "This one's a lifesaver at work," he announced to the small crowd. "I honestly don't know what I'd do without her." The words were innocent enough, but his tone, the proprietary glance he shot in her direction, made my stomach clench. Another time, he'd clapped me on the back, a wide, conspiratorial grin on his face. "David, you better watch out," he joked. "If she ever decides to leave you, I might just have to steal her full time." Everyone laughed, a polite, uncomfortable ripple through the group. Sophia laughed too, a sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't find it funny at all. I told myself I was overreacting, that my own insecurity was twisting his words. He was a family friend. He was her boss. Of course he valued her. But the comments lingered, replaying in my mind long after the laughter had faded. Sophia seemed completely oblivious to my growing unease. When I tried to talk to her about the long hours, about the feeling that she was slipping away, she'd sigh, a sound heavy with a weariness that felt more like impatience. "David, this is just how it is right now. This big project is everything. Once it's done, I promise, things will go back to normal." But normal was a destination we never reached. The distance between us widened into a chasm. Her phone was a permanent extension of her hand. On weekends, the time we once reserved for family, she'd excuse herself to take urgent calls, her voice a low murmur as she paced in the other room, leaving me to build Lego towers with the kids, a solo parent in my own home. I tried to fight the feeling, to convince myself that this was just a phase, a temporary sacrifice for a greater reward. But late at night, lying beside her in the dark, her back turned to me as the blue light of her phone illuminated her face. I couldn't escape the cold, nagging certainty that I was losing her, that something precious was being irrevocably broken. One night, after the kids were asleep, I made one more attempt. We were sitting on the couch, the television murmuring in the background. "Sophia," I began, my voice careful, measured. "Do you think maybe you're working too much? It feels like we barely exist in the same space anymore." She didn't look up from her phone. "David, you know I'm doing this for us," she said, her tone sharp with frustration. "Robert expects 110%. I can't afford to disappoint him. Can we just not do this right now?" Her words were a dismissal, a door slammed shut in my face. I let it drop. What else could I do? In hindsight, those moments were not cracks. They were gaping wounds in the foundation of our marriage. I wanted to trust her, to believe in the life we had built. But deep down, a part of me already knew. I just wasn't ready to admit it. Sophia's birthday was approaching, and I seized upon it as a life raft. Our life had become a choppy sea of tension and unspoken resentments, and I missed the calm waters of our beginning. I missed her laugh, the easy, unburdened sound it used to be. I missed the simple intimacy of shared moments, uncorrupted by the relentless demands of her job. I convinced myself that this birthday could be an anchor, a chance to remind us both of the shoreline we had started from. My plan was a surprise, a grand gesture staged in the very place that had become the source of our distance, her office. I wanted to reclaim a piece of her world, to show her that my love could penetrate the corporate walls that seemed to have enclosed her. The idea began simply, cake, flowers, but it grew in my mind, blossoming into an elaborate testament to my devotion. Sophia loved orchids, specifically the pristine, elegant white ones. A week in advance, I called our old favorite florist, describing exactly what I wanted, an arrangement that was both stunning and personal. Then, the cake. Not some generic supermarket sheet cake, but the red velvet from the small bakery on the corner where we had our third date. It was her favorite, a taste of our history. On the order form, I had them write in careful, looping script. Asterisk happy birthday, Sophia. All my love, David. Asterisk. The days leading up to her birthday were a flurry of secret planning. I pictured her face, the surprise softening the tired lines around her eyes. I imagined her colleagues whispering about what a thoughtful, romantic husband I was. It was a selfish fantasy, in a way. I wanted to be the hero of her story again, not the worried, nagging husband waiting at home. I wanted to give her a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy, a brief respite from the pressure cooker world of Robert's demands. The morning of her birthday, I woke before dawn. I kissed her forehead as she was already rushing out the door, her phone pressed to her ear. "See you tonight," she called over her shoulder, her voice distracted. "See you sooner than you think," I whispered to the empty space she left behind. After dropping the kids at school, I collected my props. The orchids were breathtaking, a cascade of white petals. The cake was perfect. Driving toward the gleaming glass tower of her office building, I felt a nervous flutter of excitement. This was it. This gesture, this cake, these flowers, they would fix us. The receptionist, a kind-faced woman named Brenda, greeted me with a warm smile. "You must be David," she said, her eyes twinkling as she took in my cargo. "Sophia is a lucky woman." "Thanks," I said, my own smile feeling genuine for the first time in weeks. "Just want to make her day special." As I rode the elevator, I rehearsed my lines. Asterisk happy birthday, honey. I thought you could use a little surprise. Asterisk simple. Heartfelt. Perfect. But as I stepped onto her floor, the quiet unnerved me. It was the middle of the day, yet the hallway was hushed. Her office door was slightly ajar, and from within, I could hear voices. Hers and a man's. Robert's. I froze, my hand tightening on the floral wrapping. A cold, inexplicable dread washed over me. It was the tone of their voices, not professional, not formal. It was intimate, laced with a shared, private laughter. It's her birthday, I told myself. He's probably just wishing her well. But something held me back, a primal instinct screaming that I was about to walk into a scene not meant for my eyes. I took a hesitant step closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pushed the door open just a fraction more, peering through the gap. And then I saw it. The world stopped. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Sophia was standing by her desk, but she wasn't working. Her arms were looped around Robert's neck, her head tilted back. His hands were on her waist, settled there with an easy, proprietary familiarity. And then he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck on the cheek. It was slow, deep, and passionate. A kiss that spoke of history, of secrets, of 1,000 moments I hadn't been privy to. The orchids slipped from my numb fingers, scattering across the sterile office carpet like fallen snow. The cake box tilted, and the red velvet creation I had so carefully chosen slid from its perch, crashing to the floor in a messy, tragic smear of cream cheese frosting. The sound shattered the moment. Sophia's head whipped around, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock. "David." Her voice was a distant buzz, drowned out by the roaring in my ears. The surprise I had planned, the beautiful, hopeful gesture, had detonated in my hands, leaving behind nothing but the smoking, unrecognizable ruin of my marriage. This wasn't a birthday surprise. It was a nightmare from which I knew, with sickening certainty, I would never fully awaken. My body was paralyzed, but my mind was a maelstrom. The image was burned onto my retinas, Sophia's arms draped over his shoulders as if they belonged there, his hands possessively on her waist. The sheer deliberateness of the kiss. It wasn't an accident. It was an intimacy, a well-rehearsed performance I had stumbled upon. Robert was the first to speak, his composure infuriatingly intact. He pulled away from Sophia with a casualness that was more insulting than any apology. "It's nothing," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone, as if I'd caught him borrowing a stapler without asking. He looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, not remorse. "It's just a kiss." Just a kiss, asterisk. Those 3 words were the spark that ignited the gunpowder in my veins. The paralysis shattered. A primal rage, raw and blinding, surged through me. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I moved. With a guttural roar that felt torn from the deepest part of my soul, I lunged forward and slammed the door open, the wood cracking against the interior wall. They broke apart, startled by the violence of my entrance. Sophia's face was a canvas of horror, her skin chalky white. "David," she stammered, her hands flying to her mouth. But my focus was entirely on him. On Robert, standing there with a smug, condescending look that suggested I was the one who was out of line. "It's not what it looks like," he said, the classic, pathetic defense of the guilty. The lie propelled me forward. Before anyone could react, my fist connected with his jaw. The sound was a sickening crack, a wet, percussive thud that seemed to echo in the sudden, dead silence of the office. A jolt of pain shot up my arm, but it was eclipsed by a grim, visceral satisfaction. Robert yelped, stumbling backward, his hand flying to his face as he crumpled into a nearby chair, groaning. "You bastard!" I screamed, my voice ragged, echoing in the now alert office. Chaos erupted. Sophia shrieked my name, rushing to place herself between me and the fallen Robert. Out in the hallway, heads began to pop out of doorways, faces a mixture of shock, fear, and morbid curiosity. The private nightmare had become a public spectacle. "How long?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a fury that shook my entire body. I pointed a shaking finger at Sophia. "How long has this been going on?" She couldn't meet my eyes. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. It's not what you think," she finally whispered, tears streaming down her face, mingling with her perfectly applied makeup. "Don't you dare lie to me." I roared, the sound ripping through my throat. "I saw it. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you think I'm blind?" From his chair, Robert mumbled something through a rapidly swelling jaw. "It was nothing, you're overreacting." Overreacting. The arrogance was breathtaking. I took a step toward him, my fists clenched, ready to finish what I had started. But Sophia grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please, David, stop. Please, just let me explain," she begged, her voice a desperate sob. I shook her off, her touch feeling like a brand. I couldn't look at her. The woman I loved, the mother of my children, was a stranger. This entire time, while I was at home worrying about her, trusting her, she was living a secret life. I turned and stormed out of the office, leaving the scene of my life's demolition behind me. The scattered orchids, the ruined cake, the weeping traitor, and her groaning lover. As I strode down the hallway, a gauntlet of stunned, whispering faces, I felt their stares like physical blows. The drive home was a red-tinted blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. My mind was a frantic reel of questions I didn't want the answers to. Every late night, every work dinner, every distracted smile was now cast in a sinister new light. When I reached our house, our house, I walked into the silent living room and collapsed onto the couch. In the suffocating darkness, I replayed the scene again and again. The kiss, his words, her tears, the life I had so carefully built, the future I had so naively believed in, had been obliterated in a single, devastating moment. The house was a tomb. I sat in the dark for hours, the silence pressing in on me, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. When Sophia finally came home, the sound of her key in the lock was like a gunshot. She found me sitting there, a silhouette in the moonlight filtering through the window. The anger from the afternoon had cooled into a hard, dense ball of ice in my stomach. I needed answers. I needed the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. The opportunity presented itself the next morning with chilling ease. Sophia, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, was in the shower. Her phone, the ubiquitous third party in our marriage, lay buzzing on the nightstand. I had never invaded her privacy before. The very idea had always felt like a violation of the trust that was the bedrock of our relationship. But that bedrock was now rubble. Trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. With trembling hands, I picked it up. My heart hammered as I typed in the password. Our anniversary, a cruel irony that twisted the knife in my gut. The messages were there, a glowing testament to her betrayal. I scrolled, my thumb moving with a mechanical detachment, until I saw his name, Robert. The thread was an epic of deceit. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you, asterisk. I'll make up an excuse to keep you late tonight. Same spot as usual, asterisk. Don't worry about David. He doesn't suspect a thing, right? He's too trusting, asterisk." Each word was a fresh wound. The casual cruelty, the calculated deception, it was all there, in black and white. They discussed me as an obstacle, a fool to be managed. My hands tightened around the phone, the plastic creaking under the pressure. There were photos, too. Selfies of them clinking glasses in dimly lit restaurants I'd never been to, laughing in his car, and one, the one that finally broke me, of them in what was unmistakably a hotel room. Sophia wearing his dress shirt, a playful smile on her face. The timestamps provided a brutal, undeniable timeline. This wasn't a recent mistake. This was months of a sordid, parallel life she had been living. I sat there, staring at the screen, the evidence of my life's greatest lie, until the water in the shower shut off. When Sophia emerged, wrapped in a towel, her cautious, hopeful expression dissolved the moment she saw what I was holding. "David," she began, her voice a fragile whisper. "I can explain." "Explain what?" I interrupted, my own voice low and dangerously calm. "Explain the months of lies? The secret meetings? The messages where you and Robert laugh about what a gullible fool I am." She froze, her mouth agape, searching for a defense that didn't exist. "It's not what it looks like," she finally managed, the same tired, insulting refrain from the day before. "Don't," I snapped, the icy calm shattering. I stood up, holding the phone out like an indictment. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence again. I've read everything. I've seen the pictures. This wasn't a mistake, Sophia. This was an affair. A long, calculated affair. So tell me, how long?" Tears welled in her eyes, finally spilling over. She sank onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. "A few months," she choked out, her voice muffled. It started when things got so hard between us. I didn't mean for it to happen." Her excuse was a lit match to my simmering rage. "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice dripping with bitter disbelief. "Decisions were made, Sophia. You made a choice every single time you texted him. Every time you stayed late at work. Every time you lied to my face. You chose him. Over me. Over our family. I'm sorry," she sobbed, looking up at me, her face a mess of tears and regret. "I was lonely, David. I felt like you weren't there anymore. Robert, he made me feel seen." Her attempt to shift the blame was the final insult. "So your solution to feeling lonely was to cheat?" I shot back. "To betray the man who loved you, who trusted you, who was at home with our children while you were off feeling seen by your boss." She reached for me, a pleading gesture, but I recoiled as if from a flame. The space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. "Don't," I said, my voice hard as granite. "Don't you dare try to make this my fault. You did this. You broke this. You destroyed us." The room fell silent, filled only by the sound of her broken sobs. A part of me wanted to scream, to smash things, to make the physical world reflect the demolition inside me. But instead, I just felt a profound, hollow emptiness. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there with the ruins of our life. I didn't know what the next step was, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that there was no going back. Our marriage was over. The arrogance of men like Robert is a peculiar thing. They build their worlds on foundations of charisma and power, believing themselves architects of their own invulnerable reality. He truly believed his dismissal, it's just a kiss would be enough to smooth over the chasm he'd helped create. He was wrong. The fallout from that afternoon in Sophia's office was not a brush fire to be stamped out. It was a wildfire, and it consumed everything in its path. The first casualty was the office itself. My punch had been more than a physical blow. It was a public declaration. The story spread with lightning speed, fueled by the whispers of shocked employees. By the time Robert returned to work, his jaw wired shut and a constellation of purple bruises blooming on his cheek, he was no longer the respected CEO. He was a scandal. He tried to control the narrative, of course. A company-wide email was sent, vaguely referring to a personal misunderstanding that was unfortunately blown out of proportion. But the image of him, humbled and injured, combined with the rampant gossip, rendered his words hollow. The board of directors was less interested in his spin. Their concern was singular, the company's reputation. An emergency meeting was called. I later heard from a sympathetic source inside that it was a bloodbath. Evelyn Reed, a formidable woman on the board known for her sharp intellect and sharper tongue, led the charge. "This is not a personal matter, Robert," she had stated, her voice cutting through his mumbled defenses. "This is a catastrophic failure of leadership. You abused your power, engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, and brought violence and scandal into our workplace. Our clients and investors are not interested in your romantic entanglements. They are interested in stability and integrity, both of which you have spectacularly compromised." Whispers of other improprieties, previously dismissed as rumors, began to resurface. Robert's carefully crafted image was disintegrating in real time. Within a week, his resignation was announced. It was framed as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities, the standard corporate euphemism for being unceremoniously thrown out. Sophia, meanwhile, was living through her own quiet inferno. While Robert was the primary target, she was seen as his willing accomplice. The colleagues who had once been her friends now treated her like a ghost, their eyes sliding past her in the hallways. Invitations to team lunches stopped. She was removed from key projects. Her closest work friend, Janet, cornered her by the coffee machine one morning. "How could you?" Janet had hissed, her voice low but full of contempt. "We all looked up to you, and you jeopardized all of our jobs for him." Sophia became a pariah, a walking cautionary tale in a workplace she had once thrived in. She resigned a week after Robert, her career there in ruins. But the consequences didn't stop at the office door. Robert's wife, Linda, was a woman of considerable social standing, a pillar of their community. The news of the affair, and more damningly, the public, violent confrontation, reached her not from her husband, but through the merciless grapevine of their social circle. The humiliation was absolute. For years, she had stood by him, the graceful, supportive wife. Now, she was a figure of pity. A month after Robert's resignation, Linda filed for divorce. And she didn't go quietly. She hired the most ruthless lawyer in the city. The divorce proceedings were brutal and public, splashed across the local business journals. Robert, the charismatic titan of industry, was now just another disgraced executive in a messy, expensive divorce. He lost the house, a significant portion of his fortune, and, most devastatingly, the respect of his two teenage sons, who were old enough to read the headlines about their father's disgrace. I watched all of this from a distance, a spectator to the demolition he had initiated. I would be lying if I said I didn't feel a grim, cold satisfaction. He had treated my life, my marriage, as a game, and he had lost spectacularly. Yet, woven into that satisfaction was a strange thread of pity. He had built his entire identity on a throne of arrogance, and now he was left with nothing but the rubble. The last I heard, he had sold his remaining assets and moved out of state, a man in exile, leaving behind the scorched earth of a life he had torched with his own hands. His downfall was a stark reminder that the higher you build your ivory tower, the farther you have to fall. While Robert's world imploded in a public spectacle, Sophia's collapsed in a quieter, more personal way. The affair had cost her career, her reputation, and her marriage, leaving her adrift in a sea of her own making. The judgment from the outside world was relentless, but the deepest wounds were self-inflicted. She was forced to confront the person she had become, and she didn't like what she saw. Our supervised visits with the children were strained and painful. Noah, too young to understand the complexities, was simply confused by the sudden fracture in his world, his wariness toward his mother a palpable thing. Abigail, older and more perceptive, wore her anger like armor. She would answer her mother's questions with monosyllabic grunts, her gaze fixed on anything but Sophia's face. It was in this crucible of loss and regret that Sophia finally began to change. One evening, she called me. Her voice was different, stripped of its usual confidence, hesitant and fragile. "David," she started, I just wanted to let you know I've started seeing a therapist. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need to understand why. Why I threw everything away." There was a raw sincerity in her voice that caught me off guard. I didn't offer false comfort or easy absolution. "I'm glad you're getting help, Sophia," I said, my tone neutral but honest. "I want to make amends," she continued, her voice cracking. "Not just to you. To the kids. I can't bear the thought of them growing up believing I didn't love them, that our family meant nothing to me." This was the first of many such conversations. She began to take responsibility in a way she hadn't before. The excuses about loneliness and feeling unseen were replaced by stark, painful admissions of selfishness and moral failure. "I made a terrible, selfish mistake," she told me during one call, her voice thick with tears. "I was so caught up in the attention and feeling desired that I became blind to what I already had. I don't expect you to ever forgive me, David, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am." Her apologies were hard to hear. They stirred a dormant part of me that still mourned the woman I thought I had married. But the damage was too profound, the betrayal too deep. When she tentatively asked if there was any chance for us to make things right, I had to be firm. Sophia, I appreciate that you're doing the work to heal, I told her, my voice steady. But our marriage is over. The trust is gone, and we can't rebuild on a foundation of ruins. You need to focus on being the best mother you can be, and I need to focus on moving forward. The finality in my words hurt her. I could hear it in her choked sob. But it was a necessary pain, a clean break where a festering wound had been. In the months that followed, I watched as she poured her energy into rebuilding her relationship with Abigail and Noah. It was a slow, arduous process. Abigail was her toughest critic, rebuffing her attempts at connection with adolescent fury. But Sophia persisted. She showed up for every visit, attended parenting workshops, wrote them letters filled with apologies and love, and slowly, painstakingly, began to earn back a sliver of their trust. I witnessed a turning point one afternoon when I overheard Abigail talking to her after a visit. "You really hurt us, Mom," she said, her voice small but clear. "But I guess people can change." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Sophia's journey toward redemption was her own to walk. I could respect her efforts from a distance, for the sake of our children, but I knew my path lay in a different direction. I had to build a new life for myself, one not defined by her mistakes. Her redemption was her own to find. My peace was mine to create. Moving forward felt like learning to walk again after a devastating injury. The betrayal had left deep, jagged scars on my soul, and for a long time, every step was fraught with pain. But I had a choice. I could remain a prisoner of the past, forever defined by Sophia's infidelity, or I could build a new future on the plot of land I had been left with. I chose to build. My primary focus became Abigail and Noah. They were the unwavering anchors in my storm-tossed life. I was determined to create a sanctuary for them, a home filled with so much love, stability, and laughter that it would, in time, overshadow the trauma of our family's collapse. We established new traditions, small rituals that became the scaffolding of our new life. Friday nights became movie nights, the three of us curled up on the couch under a mountain of blankets, arguing playfully over popcorn toppings. Saturday mornings were for pancakes, with Abigail mastering the perfect flip and Noah anointing each stack with a deluge of syrup. These simple moments were my salvation. They were proof that life and love continued. But healing wasn't just about being a father. It was about rediscovering myself. I had been one half of a whole for so long. I had forgotten what it felt like to be just David. I reconnected with old friends, men I'd let drift away in the busy currents of marriage and fatherhood. My friend Mark, seeing the hollow look in my eyes, practically dragged me on a hiking trip one weekend. "Fresh air and a little perspective," he'd said. "It's cheaper than therapy." He was right. As we stood on a windy summit, looking out over a valley cloaked in mist, I felt a profound sense of release. The world was so much bigger than my small, shattered corner of it. For the first time in months, I took a full, deep breath, and it didn't hurt. I also rediscovered a part of myself I'd long since packed away, my love for woodworking. I cleared out a corner of the garage, dusted off my old tools, and felt the familiar heft of the saw in my hand. The scent of freshly cut pine was therapeutic, the focused, methodical work of balm for my fractured mind. I started with a simple bookshelf for the kids' room, then a coffee table. My final project was a large, sturdy dining table, big enough for the three of us and with room to spare. As I ran my hand over the smooth, finished surface, I felt a surge of pride. I had taken raw, splintered wood and created something whole, beautiful, and functional. The metaphor was not lost on me. Sophia remained a consistent presence in the children's lives. Our interactions were polite, but bound by carefully drawn lines. I saw the changes in her, a new humility, a quiet strength. And I was glad for her, and for our kids. But my heart was no longer entangled with hers. The scars were still there, faint silver lines on my soul, but they no longer ached. They were just a part of my story, a reminder of a chapter that had closed. One day, I found myself having coffee with a woman I'd met through a mutual friend. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. I didn't feel the need to guard my heart or recount my sob story. I just felt normal. It wasn't love, Not yet. But it was a flicker of possibility, a hint of a new chapter waiting to be written. This new life wasn't the one I had originally designed from that sun-drenched blueprint all those years ago. It was something different, something forged in fire and rebuilt by hand. It was stronger, more resilient, and more authentically mine. I had learned that a home isn't just a structure you build with someone else. It's a space you create within yourself. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was finally home.